overzealous, and apparently the verdict has been read, and you have it there, Steve.
Yeah, so we're just getting it in right now, and it's exactly what we just said, Marissa. Right now we're looking at guilty of one count of transportation to engage in prosecution, guilty in one count of transportation to engage in prostitution, okay? So that charge, both counts, guilty. Not guilty in sex trafficking, not guilty in sex trafficking. Okay, so that was the question. So those were the four, we'll say, lesser counts. And there was a question as to whether or not he'd be found guilty in all of those. So the two counts of sex trafficking, not guilty. The two counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, guilty. The big one, the racketeering, not guilty. And that's what we were saying. That's a very, very difficult charge to prove in the court of law. Now, what does that mean as far as sentencing? Well, we know that that would have carried the bigger sentence, right? That was the potential for life in prison with the racketeering. So we're not looking at that. So you're looking at essentially a max of, and I understand with all of these, it would have been a 15-year minimum sentence. The judge may or may not have some leeway with that, depending on, you know, that judge. And obviously, it could go to an early appeal. We're going to check in with our legal expert here in just a second to find out more about that. But
and
the bottom line is, Diddy found guilty of two of those lesser charges.
Yeah, and we have to give kudos to our legal experts, Jess Lettingham as well as Michelle Thomas, who have joined us for weeks now. And both of them said that they believed out of all of the counts, the transportation for purposes of prostitution was the strongest one. The prosecution had more evidence on that than the others. And to bring our viewers up to speed, those counts do involve Cassie, his ex-girlfriend, as well as a woman who went by the name of Jade in the trial, that they said that they were, the jury has just found, they were indeed transported for the purpose of prostitution.
Yeah, it's tough for Diddy, right? Because you saw, and if you watched him any of the video yesterday, you saw that once those questions continued to come in, he seemed to be a little dejected, right? Obviously so. And you wondered if they realized at the time that that meant that there was a better chance of potentially a guilty verdict. In the end, we got two of them. Let's bring in our chief legal correspondent, Katie Barlow, to explain more about what this means now for the future, for potential sentencing, and where things go from here. Katie, good morning.
Hey, good morning to both of you. Obviously, this is a case that Fox 5 has been following closely. And after the jury hedged yesterday a little bit and was unable to reach an ultimate determination on the RICO charge, that was probably an indicator to prosecutors, as you were just saying, we've been talking about here, that wasn't the strongest charge. Proving a RICO claim, you have to prove that there is a criminal enterprise. And the prosecutor's theory here, as I understand it, was that he kind of used his business empire as the criminal enterprise here to further these other criminal acts. And that's a very difficult thing to do, both proving what was in his head and the development of that criminal enterprise and how sweeping it was. And I think prosecutors also were a little bit hesitant about that towards the end because, as we reported last week, they kind of, they didn't drop charges, but they dropped theories to kind of streamline what would have made it easier for the jury to understand in determining whether there was this criminal enterprise and what he did to further that criminal enterprise. So perhaps not surprising, given some of the tea leaves that we've had to read. Now the question is what happens with sentencing and what each charge that he was convicted of comes with. And as we've talked about, as is typical in a federal criminal case, once the jury reads a verdict, then there's a team of people who put together basically a recommendation to the judge, and they will recommend sentencing, and they will look at his background, his criminal history, his ties to the community, a number of things, and they will put together a report, and then the judge will take that all into consideration, and whether there are any mandatory minimums with what he was convicted of, which I'm not sure if there are mandatory minimums that come with the lesser charges. And then the judge will ultimately reach a decision on sentencing. And the number one rule with sentencing, other than mandatory minimums, is a judge ultimately has discretion there.
Katie, at this point, it doesn't look like a mandatory minimum with those specific charges. What we're hearing right now is potentially up to 10 years. That's the early word that we're getting from the courthouse in Manhattan. That being said, Katie, what would you look at? What would the judge look at? I mean, obviously, you could consider time served, but that's less than a year right now, right? If it's an up to sentence, how much leeway does the judge have then as far as what he or she could do?
Completely weigh. The judge is the king or queen of his or her courtroom, and in criminal trials, the judge has discretion here. Again, caveating mandatory minimum sentences. The judge is going to look at, of course, the testimony that we've heard and have been reporting on for the past few weeks, and the case that was presented by prosecutors here. But the judge is also going to kind of look at the broader package of Diddy's life and his existence right now. Again, things like
So make sure.
ties to the community, criminal history, age, all of those things. The judge will take some time, look at all of those things, and then reach a decision. But up to 10 years means that Diddy could be facing the maximum.